WGAU. John Monds joining us now from my neck of the woods, Grady County, down in South Georgia. He is, and you may have picked up on this earlier in the week, a Libertarian candidate for governor. He actually kicked off his campaign earlier this week. He was on your ballot back in '08, ran for a seat on the Georgia Public Service Commission unsuccessfully, but he did reach a major milestone for the Libertarian Party in Georgia, became the first Libertarian candidate to amass more than 1 million votes on an election ballot in Georgia. John Monds joining us now. Mr. Monds, thanks for your time this morning.
Hey, Tim, thanks for having me.
Should also add to the resume the head of the NAACP there in Grady County. Tell us about the Libertarian Party and your place in it, your philosophy as it relates to the Libertarian Party. What does it mean to you to be a Libertarian?
Well, we are the party of principle, and some of what we believe in, of course, is less government, lowering taxes, individual freedoms, but with that, individual responsibility. And I think more than anything, those are the type of things that brought me to the Libertarian Party and why I've decided to be active in the party and just move it forward, hopefully, by bringing some of these ideas to the citizens here in Georgia.
I mentioned that campaign of last year, more than 1 million votes and a run for a seat on the Georgia Public Service Commission. First time a Libertarian candidate has been able to do that in Georgia. That said, successes for the Libertarians are few and far between, not just in Georgia, but elsewhere. What has to happen for the Libertarians to begin to get some success? I always look at them. They always want to run for president. They always field a candidate for governor and Senate and those sorts of seats. And I always wonder why we don't have Libertarians running for county commission and city council.
Well, a lot of that is due to the ballot access laws that have been put in place by Republicans and Democrats to keep out the competition. For example, here in Georgia, for us to be able to field candidates in all the offices below the state level, we have to reach a 20% level in either a governor's race or presidential race. And that's one of the highest percentages in the nation. And without having that full party status here in Georgia, our candidates have to go out and petition just to be on the ballot. So it drives a lot of people away because of the effort, the expense, and just getting on the ballot to offer some competition to these Republicans and Democrats.
Let's talk about your own campaign for governor. John Monds, again, Libertarian candidate for governor. Let's put it in the context of what our legislature is facing right now today. I mentioned that the session ends, or is scheduled to end, 1 week from today. House Speaker says we may have to come back later in the year if this budget situation gets any worse. It's plenty bad now. They opened the session with a budget deficit of $2 billion. How do we deal with that? Budget cuts across the board. Everybody's looking at cuts, even in education. How do we deal with that? What's the Libertarian approach? What's the John Monds approach to dealing with the state's budget situation?
Well, I think people will find out, and this is a perfect example of the overall, I believe, waste that's out there, spending that goes on that might not necessarily need to go on. When they pass the budget, when they make up this $2 billion deficit, for most people, not much is going to change as far as the types of services they're getting from the government. So it makes you kind of wonder if we can find a way to cut $2 billion and not really see a bunch of changes, maybe we shouldn't have been spending a lot of that money in the first place. So we have to look at also, what's exactly necessary? What's the proper role and function of government? And maybe they're doing things that they need not be doing and look to alternatives.
Such as, give me an example. What would you cut? What would you say this is a non-essential function of government? We ought to do away with it.
Well, the bulk of, say, the budget that the state of Georgia spends is in education. So those are going to be, that area has to be looked at very closely as far as how much it costs to educate a child here in Georgia. And, what I'm doing now is pulling my team together, and we're going to look at, each in every dollar that's spent in the state budget, especially in education, and see exactly where the fat is. And so, I'm not coming out right now. I don't have my platform all out there, but I guarantee people it's going to be different than anything that they'll see or hear from any of the Republican and Democratic candidates.
Well, let's go ahead and put you in office right now. You're the governor of Georgia today. John Monds, Libertarian candidate for governor down in Grady County, joining us this morning. And for the next few minutes, the governor who is in office now, Sonny Perdue, had a decision to make a few weeks back whether or how many of those federal stimulus dollars to accept. What would John Monds have done?
Well, once again, some of that, whenever somebody's supposedly going to give you money, it's going to come with stipulations. So you have to look at what the stipulations to that money is. And, for example, I think they're talking about funding some of the unemployment benefits and how they would lock in, to get that initial money, it would lock in commitments to continue paying it, even though the money would dry up and go somewhere. So, I think not taking the money, or looking very closely at where it came from and what's it to be used for, is a good decision. And people don't realize this money that comes with these strings attached, it's our money in the first place. So, it's not government money. The federal government isn't giving us anything that we hadn't given them in the first place.
Well, kind of yes and no. I follow that argument, but at the same time they are, because they're running a deficit. I mean, they're basically printing the money that they're sending back to the states now and printing it by the trillions of dollars.
Yes, and then what that does is it hurts us through the unseen taxation of it. I mean, they're driving down the value of the dollar, so those dollars aren't going to go as far anyway, and they're hurting the future of our kids by devaluating the dollar and forcing these costs on down the line. And so we have to look at the federal level, we have to look at the state level, we have to look at especially issues of taxation. And, if you want to stimulate the economy, I think the best way to do it is let people keep more of their money and let them be the ones to decide where they can spend it or not.
In fairness to the Republicans, who, of course, are in the majority in the Georgia legislature and hold the governor's office now, many of them say the same thing. In fact, they've just passed legislation to that effect. That's their version of a stimulus plan. Let the taxpayer keep more of his or her dollar. That's basically the GOP plan. To the extent that you siphon off votes, some say John Monds, as a libertarian, would take votes away from a Democratic or from a Republican candidate, might help the Democrats, who to a large extent hold a differing view on that. Logistically speaking, do you worry about that? If you're not going to be governor, I understand that's your aspiration, but is there in your mind the potential for hurting the GOP candidates?
No, I don't think we hurt anybody. Those who vote for us want to vote for us. And if they didn't vote for one of the other parties, those parties didn't deserve that vote in the first place. So I don't look at it as hurting one of the other parties. I think, one, it helps libertarianism. Any vote we get helps libertarianism. It helps us bring to the forefront that people are concerned about their liberty and freedoms. And when you talk about the GOP and what they talk about, they've had their chance. They've been in office. They had a chance to do the things that they like to talk about as far as people compare to libertarians and conservatism and the GOP together. But when you look at their record and what they've done with the chances they've had in power to make the type of decisions that they talk about, I think a lot of people, a lot of Republicans and conservatives are very upset with what they've done with this opportunity. So hopefully that's a good thing for us, and we'll see.
John Monds, we certainly will see. Libertarian candidate for governor, joining us this morning from Cairo, or near Cairo, in Grady County, on the ballot in 2010. I'm sure we'll talk between now and then. Thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you, and I'd be glad to come back anytime.
A man who is just as happy as I am that the Cairo Syrup Makers won the state championship back in December. Thanks again. Quick break.